Morning, nice to see you guys again. So today I'm going to go through the questions, I'm going to help you where you've been stuck, and your job is to take a pencil or a colored pen, and I want you to make additional notes on top of the answers that you've already written. So if you've written the answer is blah, 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 then underneath or next to, I want you to add more information to the answer that you already have. So if I say something that you hadn't thought of, I want you to add it. Right. So you can either listen as I'm talking and kind of as you hear something that's of interest or you hear something that you hadn't thought of, I want you to quickly note it down, even if it's not in your most neatest handwriting. Or if you want to, you can pause the video and then add a little bit of extra information. So today, we're not going to tick or cross at all. What we're going to do is just think about the concepts, try and internalize or learn more about the concepts, and add to the information we have on our page. Okay. So when I look at this page of yours, I want to see two things: your original answers written in pen as normal, and then extra information squeezed in, even if it's at the top, next to, underneath, so that I can see that you've engaged and listened and learned beyond what you think, but you've had a deeper think. Right. So this year we're going to learn not just to think when we see a question, but to think a little bit deeper, and then to think a little bit deeper, and then to articulate your thinking. In other words, to put your thoughts into words. That's something we're going to be working on together. And then, of course, to write down your thoughts clearly so that as time passes, when people read your answers or read any of your writing, they will understand and actually enjoy reading what you've written. So let's quickly look at these questions. Number one says, in one full sentence, explain what the poem is about. So you should have one full sentence. You're going to use your own words, and you can say anything as long as it has something to do with first day at school, maybe a child's experience of the first day of school, or a child explaining what they're feeling on their first day of school, or what school is like for a small child. If you struggled to write an answer or you struggled to write a full sentence, then try and use the question to put in your answer as a sentence starter. So if you didn't know how to start your answer, you could have said something like, the poem is about, and then you'll say. Okay, so if you didn't write the poem is about, or um, this the first day of school is a poem which is about, then maybe you want to start your sentence with a sentence starter. That was a pretty straightforward question. I'm sure you all understood what the main point of the poem was. So let's look at number two. Write down a line from the poem which shows us that this poem is written from the viewpoint of a very young child. Now, there's so much in the poem that you could have chosen. So I want you to look at the answer you've got, and I want you to add an additional part of the poem that you haven't thought of or that you didn't write down, so that you have more than one. If you didn't answer the question or you didn't know how to start answering the question, you could use the question in your answer or your question to start your answer. So you could have said something like, the line from the poem which shows us that this poem is written from the viewpoint of a very young child is, and then you can quote. Don't worry too much about being scared to use the quotation marks or the inverted commas in an incorrect way. We're going to learn this year how to do it correctly. But you should preferably not just put the words from the poem, but put it into an answer, as if you are answering out loud. So some of the things you could have said was, well, from the words million, billion, willion. Normally, that's not a scientific term or a term that adults would use, so that gives us a clue that it's a young child. Anything like, why are they all so big, other children? So if you haven't got that as an answer now, you can take your colored pen or pencil and squeeze it in somewhere on the side. The fact that they say other children means that the person who's saying the poem, the person whose viewpoint we are looking at is a child. You could have said anything like, you could have quoted something that shows that the child has a good imagination, the imagination of a child. You could have said the fact that he says lesson and the fact that he doesn't know what a lesson is. The same for classroom. And the same for I wish I could remember my name. You could have said mummy said. I wish she was here. So I think most of the lines in the poem actually give you an idea that this is from the viewpoint of a small child. So if we were discussing this in class, or if you were writing a response in a test or an exam, maybe, you would quote the part that you think gives the clue, and then under it, you would perhaps even write an extra sentence explaining why you chose that particular line. Okay, so don't worry too much now. This is a skill we're gonna gain over the year or over the next 2 years. But I hope you found at least something from the poem that gives you a clue that this is from the viewpoint of a child. Number 3, read lines 4 to 6. So for that, you actually need to count the lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can even write on the poem with a pencil or a pen. So noisy, so much at home, they must have been born in uniform, lived their lives in playgrounds. So what does this description suggest about how the other children seem to this child? So from the child's viewpoint, from the smallest child, when they look at the other children, how do the other children seem? Well, there's a lot of things you could say. You could mention the fact that they are very loud or very noisy to the child. So maybe you could also say the children, they seem at home, meaning they seem confident. Now, what you should be doing is you should be listening very carefully with your pen or your pencil ready to write. And when you hear an idea that you didn't write down, I want you to add to your answer. You don't need to write every single word I say, but if you think, I didn't think of that, they think the children are confident, then you can just write there, confident. Even if the spelling is incorrect, I want to see that you are involved and that you are engaging with the content. You could have said something like, they seem at home, meaning that they are comfortable. They don't seem to have anxiety, or they don't seem to be awkward. They seem to know everything about school. They seem to have spent lots of time at school. Okay. So any of those kind of ideas would have been a good, appropriate answer, or anything else that's appropriate, as long as you've gotten the clues from those 3 lines. I hope you've added at least one thing to the answer that you already have. Then 3, the next part of the question, because there's 2 parts to the question. The next part says, what does this suggest about how he is feeling? Now, in these 3 lines, they don't actually say the small child is feeling or thinks the other children are But we need to infer or to guess how that child is feeling compared to the noisy, comfortable, confident big children. So the small child is feeling the opposite way to those boisterous, loud, and comfortable big children. You could have said any of the following, and I'll encourage you to add 1 or 2 other words on top of the ones that you've got. You could have said something like, he is feeling, or you could even write it in a more detailed sentence and say, lines 4 to 6 suggest that the boy is feeling. I think if the other children are big, perhaps he's feeling small. If the other children are noisy, he might be feeling quiet or shy. The other children seem confident at home. Maybe he's feeling uncomfortable or insecure, unsure of himself, confused, overwhelmed. Whatever you think the big children are not, that is what he is feeling. Okay, number 4, you needed to highlight the correct answer only. So what does a lesson look like? In this line of the poem, it's an example of, is it a statement? A statement is when we just say something, we are stating a fact. A question, which often has a question word, always has a question mark, or a command, which usually has a strong word or verb telling us what to do. So it's definitely B, which is a question. We know it's a question because it has what and a question mark at the end. Number 5, alliteration is when a letter is repeated. So Peter Piper picked a peck of peppers, pickled peppers. Betty bought a batch of she-shelled seashells. The repetition of a sound. Doesn't have to be the same letter always, but as long as it sounds the same. So I found one, and that was sounds small and slimy. If you found another, that's fine, but you make sure that you highlight the sounds that are repeated. There should be, repetition means more than one. So 2 or 3 or more sounds close together. They don't need to be right after each other, but preferably in the same line or the same sentence or nearby. So in case you're confused, sounds small and slimy, and you will highlight the sound that's repeated. Okay, you're doing good. Keep going. Number 6, highlight the correct answer only. I wish I could remember my name. So this line from the poem, they give you the options. Is it past tense? Is it present tense? Or is it future tense? So saying I wish I could remember is present tense. In fact, if you have a close look, you'll see the whole poem is written in the present tense, as if he is experiencing the first day of school right now. So the answer is B, present tense. 7, they ask you to highlight the correct answer only. Why are they so big, other children? Is that line a statement, stating a fact or giving us additional information? Is it a question, regardless of if it's answered or not? Or is it a command, telling somebody what to do? It's definitely B, a question. You see the question word why at the beginning of the sentence? Add a question mark. Now don't fade on me now because we're almost done. Number 8, they ask you to quote a line to show that the child misses his mother. Now we're going to work on using quotation marks in the correct way. If you put quotation marks or inverted commas, then I'm really happy. If you didn't and you just wrote the line from the poem, that's fine. Somewhere, regardless of however you answered the question, I wish she was here. For me, that's the most obvious sign that the child misses their mother. If you found another quote, if you wrote a sentence underneath explaining to me why you think that quote is relevant, then I probably would have accepted it as well. Number 9, write down 2 words from the poem that show what the child thinks the lesson looks like. That's easy. Small and slimy. Number 10, highlight the correct answer only. The word teacher is an example of what part of speech? Is teacher a noun? Is teacher a verb? Or is teacher a pronoun? Now, teacher in the sentence is an example of a noun. Remember, a teacher is a thing, an object that we can see in space. We can see the teacher, we can hear the teacher. The teacher takes up space, it has weight and mass. So we give it a naming word. Okay, a naming word is a noun, teacher. It's not a proper noun because a verb is an action or being word, something happening or being done. So teacher, that doesn't fit in there. And a pronoun stands in the place of a noun, like he, she, they, it. So it's definitely a noun. We're almost there. All right. So number 11, highlight the correct answer only. The word children is an example of. Now, it's easy to spot that children is a noun, a thing, but we want to know, is it a common noun, a proper noun, or an abstract noun? Now, if you didn't know the difference between the 3, or if you don't know the difference between the 3 yet, don't panic. Some of you know, some of you may not know. Some of you may have a vague idea in the back of your mind, but not be able to remember or recall. We're going to go through this and practice it. I just wanted to get a feeling of if you know it or not. It's definitely the word children. It's definitely a common noun. There are many children in the world. So children is something that's common. There are millions of them. We see them often. They're a real everyday thing that we see. So that's why they are common. they're not a proper noun because children is not a fancy name for for small people. It's not a special word. It's just a common everyday word. The children sat on the chairs, etc. It's not an abstract noun. In this case, they're talking about specific children, the other children on the playground. So in this poem, the word children is not an abstract noun because they're not talking about a philosophy or a thought or a feeling. They're talking about the actual physical children on the playground. We're almost there, so just stick with it. Good. I hope that you've been writing some notes or making some mental notes at least so that you can remember these concepts and so that you can think a little bit deeper about them. Good. Number 12. Highlight the correct answer only. I think my name is sewn on somewhere. Do you here find another example of alliteration? Sewn on somewhere. That's very good. So this line in the poem shows an example of A, personification, B, simile, C, alliteration. Again, do not worry if you cannot define those words yet. I want to see who knows, and because I haven't taught you before, I want to get a feeling of what concepts you know and what you don't, what you feel comfortable and confident with, and what you find a bit more challenging. So if you found this challenging or you were totally stuck, that's perfectly fine. I anticipated or expected some people to be a bit stuck here. So, sewn on somewhere, it's not personification because sewing something on somewhere is not giving something, an object, a human quality. No, it's not that. It's not a simile because we're not comparing anything. It's definitely C, alliteration. Now, if you'd understood alliteration previously in the questions, you would have been able to answer this one. I hope that even if you didn't understand personification or simile at this point, that you kind of had a clue that it was alliteration because the definition of alliteration was in an earlier question. 13, we're almost there. What are wellies used for? Now, you could have said anything. I want a full sentence, preferably in a little bit of detail. So I don't want to know, preferably not a definition, a Wellington is a boot or a shoe. That's not answering the question in enough detail. The question says, what are they used for? What is their function? So wellies are used for, you could say, keeping our feet dry, used for keeping our feet dry when it rains, or keeping our ordinary shoes safe and dry, or maybe are used for protecting our feet from the rain or protecting our feet from getting wet, something along those lines. Okay, you need to use the word wellies, preferably use the words used for, and then explain what they're used for. If you just wrote a description, so Wellingtons are shoes or gumboots, or then I want you to add to your answer by saying that are used for and what you think they're used for. Okay, number 14, I'm sure you all wrote very interesting responses. I want you to check. Do you have 5 sentences? I don't mind if you write more than 5 sentences. If you feel inspired and you want to write half a page or a whole page, you're more than welcome to. But do you have at least 5 sentences? Now remember, a sentence needs to start with a capital and end with punctuation. So check that each sentence is a full, complete idea, starting with a capital and ending with a full stop. Now, a paragraph shouldn't be one sentence and then underneath, second sentence, underneath, the third sentence. A paragraph just runs on. All right, so make sure that it looks like a paragraph. Good. You should have described your first day of school. I hope that you mentioned a little bit about how you felt. And if you didn't write about how you felt, whether you were scared or nervous or confident or excited, I want you to add another line explaining not just what happened or some names or dates and facts. I want you to add at least one sentence about how that first day at school made you feel. Okay, good. So I hope you have a little bit of detail, that it's interesting, that you thought before you wrote, and you can skim through with your eyes and see if there's any words that look strange or any editing or improving that you want to do. And then the last thing, I wanted you to draw a picture showing what you looked like on your first day of school. Now, I'm not going to judge whether you are a Picasso or Leonardo. I just wanted to see a little bit of an idea of how you looked as a small child. Maybe you had a very big head, or your hair was done strangely that day. If your picture doesn't have a lot of detail, I'd like you to go back and add some more details just to make the story a little bit more interesting. Sometimes it helps to picture something in our mind before you write about it, or when you want to think deeper, drawing often helps us to remember some more details. So I want you to look at your drawing now and I want you to add some small details. What did your uniform look like, or what were you wearing? What did your hair look like? Did you have a suitcase or a lunchbox? You might want to draw someone else alongside you if you haven't done that. Maybe your mum or your dad or your driver. Maybe you want to draw your teacher as well. What were they? Maybe you can draw something that they would typically be wearing, their hairdo. You might want to draw a friend that you made on your first day. So add a little bit of detail. Maybe you want to draw some visual clues to help us know how you felt. Some rosy cheeks and a big smile if you were happy, or maybe some tears or some little lines to show that you were shivering or shaking. So I want you to make sure that whatever you do, that you are starting to think in more detail, more deeply when you're answering, you're thinking about the wording, the way you're answering, that you're writing in detail. And I hope that you went back and added some information to what you already had on this page. Now, if some of what we did today was confusing or overwhelming, please don't worry or feel stressed. I want you to feel comfortable and I want you to feel excited, because by the time you're in grade 7 next year, you're going to be confident, just like the big kids in the poem. You're going to, within a few weeks, months, and definitely by next year, feel a whole lot more confident and capable when reading, writing, and expressing yourself in English.